Hi, I'm Nikki Jovikic from Lookupstrata, and I'm recording this chat with Scott Bellerby from Strata to assist both strata managers and lot owners to navigate COVID safety in WA. Before we begin, both Scott and I would like to mention that the information contained in this session is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as legal advice. Also, neither of us are health professionals. Scott would also like to make it clear that he is not joining us today as a representative of any property body that he attends at board or committee level. He's here as the Managing Director for Strata, providing his thoughts on COVID safety. The session has been recorded on the 1st of February 2022. We all know that the situation can and has changed rapidly, so the information contained in this recording is based on the health advice at the time of publishing. Getting back to today's topic, we're going to cover some FAQs about dealing with Omicron in WA apartment buildings. This session is occurring just after the statewide double dose proof of vaccination policy, which came into effect on the 31st of January. Now that proof of vaccination is required for a variety of social situations, including cafes, bars, play centres and gyms, just to name a few, WA strata managers and lot owners are confused about where they stand. Thanks for joining us, Scott. We've been approached with questions from our audience, and I believe you've been receiving some questions through also.
Yes, thanks very much, Nikki, for the opportunity. Yeah, it's certainly a hot topic at the moment around COVID safety. Not just here in WA, but I think across the country that there's a lot of questions being asked, and so an opportunity, in the end, just to provide, I guess, my take on it. I've spent a fair bit of time reading up on it. I was sort of involved at the very start when I was the president for SCA back in March 2020, when it all started to unfold, and more recently, with the national level as well. So I've sort of tried to get a fairly good perspective across all the states and what they're doing in this space. So I have been asked by strata managers and owners just to sort of share some of my ideas around it, and great opportunity today with Lookupstrata to do that.
Excellent, thank you so much. So we together have prepared a number of FAQs, which we'll run through now, and then we'll deal with a few of the more specific questions that have been submitted to the Lookupstrata site recently. So the first question, what should schemes be doing with regards to COVID?
Well, yeah, it's always a very tricky one. Every scheme is different, and from a simple 6-lot villa complex, it might just have a central driveway, to a 300-400 lot complex with resi, commercial, retail. Every scheme is different. So I think, first of all, councillors and owners should just sit down, have a little think about how their scheme operates. What are the frequently travelled routes within the scheme? If it's a simple villa complex, they may have a shared bin area. And so what's the likelihood that residents will have greater interaction when they're travelling over the scheme? Where would those areas potentially occur? And are they areas that they maybe need to focus a little bit more around and maybe think about how they might adopt a plan? It might be as simple as just putting up some signage just to remind residents to wear a mask, practice the safe distancing, 1.5 metres, to, if it is a high travelled area, do you need to maybe think about increasing your cleaning regimes, or at least raising it with the cleaner just to monitor that area a little bit more? I think also what you need to think about is, well, what do you do if you do have an incident? Do you have a response guideline prepared? I think it's really important that the communication is open, quick and honest to everyone involved in the scheme. I wouldn't suggest sitting on this information if you do become aware you've had an incident on site. I think you should really broadcast it to the owners. Just let them know that the health department will more likely be aware of it, and you would be taking guidance from the health department on how you need to manage it.
Okay, and also one of the things that's come up in discussion are the COVID safe management plan. So can you give us a bit of an idea about what a COVID safe management plan would be?
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot more information on COVID safe management plans on the Eastern Seaboard, and there's a lot more documentation and government guidance around that. WA in the last, I think it might almost be 2 weeks now, has created a page that does provide a little bit of information on how you might go down the path of preparing a COVID safe management plan. And really, it's just asking the question again of the owners. I think that there's 5 or 6 questions there it asks, but I think the benefit of having a plan in place means that there's a clear documented management process that everyone can refer to, so they know exactly what to do if there is an incident, or if they're a little bit unsure about what their responsibilities are. If you've got a plan in place, it can give some confidence to the owners that there is something, there has been some thought around what they need to do about COVID safety on the site, but also they're aware of what will happen if there is an incident, and that this is the communication guidelines that will come out, and what processes you might need to follow. So, the COVID management plan, we've been referring to them as CSMPs, COVID Safe Management Plan. So it's now a popular acronym in the office there. But it is, I think it's highly recommended. It isn't a mandated requirement. We're still looking for a little bit more direction on government, particularly here in WA, on what we should do here. But that's by and large what the COVID Safe Management Plan would do. It'll ask you the questions and provide a few answers and a documented process on what you should implement on site.
Okay, and you mentioned there when you were chatting, Scott, about the document that SCAWA has put out. We did share it in our newsletter a couple of weeks ago, but we will share a link to it below this video. So anyone that's watching the video can pick a link up and go and download that 2-page checklist that they put out, which is really helpful as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the WA state government, the requirements around the COVID safety and whether the plan is actually mandated. You were just saying then, no, it's not actually mandated?
No, it's not mandated. Like, my hope is that the health minister will come out with a little bit better guidance around it. I think where the current government position is it's talking about public spaces. And so all the documentation and all the guidance and all the restrictions around public spaces. And of course, Strata is this unique little beast which has been missed in that it's common property certainly isn't a private space. It's a shared space that all the owners can frequent, and the owners' guests can frequent, but it's also not a public space. And I think what the government needs to do is potentially tie in. While we talk about Strata, they actually referred to it as multi-unit dwellings. So that's how they talk about Strata, as multi-unit dwellings. I think they need to tie in the shared common space of multi-unit dwellings under public open space. And then as owners, you need to think, well, here's the guideline for the outside areas of my common property. And therefore, I then probably need to consider adhering to the guidelines of the indoor areas around wearing masks, density quotients, and then do you need to go as far as potentially requiring proof of vaccination for what I term non-permanent residents coming on site.
And we have lots of questions that have come in about checking proof of vaccination as well. And we've got a few that we'll cover sort of a little bit later on as well as we're talking. And so and going back to the COVID Safe Management Plan that we've discussed, what should you be considering when you're preparing one of those documents for your building?
I think every scheme's unique, as I've mentioned before. Like I've met with 7 or 8 council owners for some of our bigger schemes, and their perspective on this is all unique. Every scheme had a different approach, and that often ties into the architectural design of the scheme. So, yesterday I met with a big scheme in Subiaco. It's 100 lots, but most of their access is open, and they didn't have concerns about Uber delivery drivers coming on site to drop off, food orders. They didn't have concerns around that, whereas another scheme we manage, it's a large multi-use scheme. They're about to go and raise, $30,000-$40,000 in additional levies just for cleaning, and they're adopting a very comprehensive COVID Safe Management Plan. So it sits somewhere around there for the bigger schemes. it might just be a couple of pages for a small scheme. This is what you need to consider. This is what we would like you to do. And this is how we're going to manage it in case of an incident. The plans, they have to be fluid around the schemes. And you come down, can you mandate the requirement for vaccination for non-permanent residents? I don't think you can. You can certainly make the request, and there's nothing stopping you as owners requesting that non-permanent residents provide proof of vaccination before they enter the scheme. But then it comes down to who polices that, and it's certainly not the strata manager, it's not the councillors, and it's not other external contractors. It's every individual living within the scheme has the responsibility to help adopt the plan and implement the plan. So if they know they've invited a visitor on site, it's their job to say, hey, can you just confirm that you're vaccinated and show me your certificate? Because that's what the rest of the owners in the scheme want. And that's what we're now policing in this building.
Okay, and I'm sure at this point, people that are listening are wondering, now, where do we get these plans from? Who can we go to? Who can we talk to? Can they talk to their strata manager about providing information? Is that part of your role? Or
in the end, you have to go to the health department, refer to the WA Health Department. You have to take your guidance from what the government is putting out there, and that's for every state, because you do have to be a little bit careful about what you are recommending, because it may have implications later on down the track. But yes, it is something. If a strata manager feels confident that they can help prepare, COVID safe management plan, then it's certainly something the strata manager can get involved in. It certainly doesn't sit in the agreed services of any of the management contracts I'm aware of. So it would be an additional service, but it would really come down to the individual. Do they have confidence that they know enough about the subject and they can prepare something that will benefit the owners and how this will benefit the residents and how this might be managed on site?
Okay, and something else that we haven't spoken about, what about people in isolation or mandatory quarantine in a building? How are you handling that in your buildings?
Well, first of all, you don't want to create a stigma around people that might be in isolation. There's a number of reasons why people might be in isolation. It might be because they're more vulnerable to catching COVID, or they have health concerns that they may suffer more serious symptoms. They might be elderly. They might have visited a hotspot and be told that they have to quarantine until they can give a negative result, or yes, they may have tested positive for COVID and they're in mandatory quarantine. So that there's all kinds of reasons why you might be isolating within the scheme. And if you are isolating in the scheme, well, there's this expectation that you're not going to leave your apartment. Now, if residents are hoping that people in isolation don't leave their apartment and don't start walking around the common areas, then as owners, you need to come and think about, well, how can you support these people? If they're in mandatory quarantine or voluntary isolation and they're not wanting to leave their apartment, what sort of support structure are you going to put around that so that they can survive and live within their apartment and not have to leave their apartment during their isolation period? And that might be setting up a little support committee for the person in isolation, connecting them. They need to put their garbage out. They can put the garbage out the front door and then close the door and let people know through email or an app. We use an app in our business where they can put a little post to the community support committee, and they'll then come take away the rubbish, or you can get the cleaners to do it. And just same with delivery of groceries. And then you have to make sure they can feed themselves. So the owner in isolation can just say, I've just received a notice that Coles or Woolies have just delivered my groceries. Could someone please bring it to my front door? And this is how you can help promote that community support within your scheme and look after these people. But it might just be that someone's in isolation voluntarily and they just, for their own mental health and well-being, all they're wanting is just a regular touch base, and you're just sending them a text or an email just saying how you're going. Just try and support them through that communication and letting them know that someone out there cares might be all that they're looking for. So that there's a range of support that a scheme could offer if someone places themselves in isolation or is mandatorily required to quarantine in their apartment.
Okay, so as an industry leader with Strata, can you give us an insight into sort of some of the things that you're doing? You've mentioned that you've got the app, you've mentioned you're setting up sort of community support groups so that they can look after people in the building. What else can you let our listeners know that you're doing that would assist?
Yeah, like I guess I've sort of prepared a fairly comprehensive COVID safe management plan, which is really asks a lot of questions, and really until you sit down with the council of owners and get some input from the owners, you don't really know how that document's going to be shaped. For one scheme, it's actually the draft is about 18 pages. One scheme, it's only going to be around about 4 or 5 pages. For another scheme, for a few of the other schemes, it's around about a 13 or a 14-page document. So we have a fairly comprehensive plan there. Internally, we're checking that all the contractors we engage, we're asking that they sign a declaration form, just confirming that the employees they send to site have been vaccinated. That is a mandatory requirement now. You could just put it on the bottom of your work order, just let people know that if you're going to this site, there's an expectation that you have a COVID vaccination. I think actually having your employer sign that, because arguably it's the employer that has to police that within their workforce, might just be a little bit more of a prudent approach. But in the end, just checking that your contractors are also safe. We adopted the policy a while back that all of our staff had to be vaccinated. In December, the last staff member was double vaxxed. We're now going out there getting our boosters, but we're also thinking about how we're probably going to limit having meetings off-site. You need to have a controlled environment when you're having your meeting, particularly around AGMs. You probably want to make sure that people, when they're turning up for an AGM, are vaccinated, because when you're bringing a lot of people together, it increases the risk. And so you need to be proactive and reduce the risk. And so in our office, we're not letting anyone into our office unless they do have a vaccination certificate. We're ensuring they wear a mask. We have a hand wash that they have to use before they come in. We're trying to limit the number that come in, because you do have your density quotient. And while it's not clear, we are sort of adopting that 1 per 4 square metres in our boardroom, which sort of means we're really only looking at around about 10 people. And so we're sort of saying, well, we're happy for the council to come in, and if we've got people nominating for the council, happy for them to come in. And if you don't have a computer, we will see if we can fit you in as well. But we're really trying to encourage owners, just in the immediate term, just to do their meetings through video conferencing. That's where we're taking it at the moment. Each business is a little bit, will always be unique, and it really depend on what they can offer to their clients.
Okay, that's really great information. Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing that with us. So hopefully the information provides our audience with some much needed clarity around this issue. And as mentioned, we've had some questions submitted with fairly specific circumstances. However, we thought we'd run through them as they provide a practical example of the FAQs, and that we've just discussed as well. So I'll just run through those, Scott, and if you could provide a response, that would be fantastic. So as a chairman of our Strata Council of 169 lots, we've been asked by our bowls club, if a bowler has not been double vaxxed, can we refuse to allow him to play? At our monthly happy hours, we do need to ask for proof of double vax prior to allowing, do we need to ask for proof of double vax prior to allow entry? And are we required to wear masks in our community and lodge dwelling complex?
So I guess it comes back to what we discussed previously, in that it's that definition around public open space and common property. I would be strongly encouraging that a scheme does take the approach that they enforce the wearing of masks indoors, and that they do practice safe distancing of 1.5 metres, and consider adopting density quotients throughout the scheme. So if you've got different common facilities, residence lounge, library, the gym, look at the size of it and actually restrict how many people should be allowed to use those spaces at any one time. Can you enforce vaccination? I'm strongly of the position that you can't stop a resident from using common area or entering their apartment if they're not double vaxxed. So I don't think you could limit or restrict that. But it's not saying that you couldn't put in a policy around, okay, if they're wanting to use the facilities, the owners can take a position that in sharing these facilities with us, we would ask that you provide proof of vaccination, or our preference would be that we do not include you within our groups. You could take an approach around that. You can't, I don't believe you could stop them from using the facilities, but you could say that our policy is that to risk our exposure, we would prefer to, at this point in time, only meet with people that are double vaxxed. And therefore, when we're putting together our team roster, we're only going to include people that have shown proof of vaccination. You could maybe take that approach. With regards to the happy hour in the scheme, I'm not sure if, certainly when you talk about the provision of alcohol, be it either for free or sold, it therefore comes under a liquor license requirement. And certainly the requirements under any liquor licensing would require proof of vaccination and masks and all the rest of it. So I'm not quite sure how that is managed on site, but owners can adopt a policy, that they can adopt a best practice approach to limit the chances of their exposure to COVID and say, this is what we would all like you to adhere to. You may not agree to it all in principle, but just for our peace of mind and for the ease of managing, in the case of an exposure, we ask that you adhere to it in its entirety. And then it's really back on those owners about whether they want to respect the wish of their neighbours, or they really just want to, be an individual and do it their own way. And it may then have consequences later on down the track for them. It's very hard if you don't respect your neighbour to then continue to be able to keep that relationship going or build on that relationship.
Okay, and when they're adopting the policies that you were just mentioning, Scott, that would be forming that would form part of that COVID safe management plan that we've been speaking about.
You need to document it. You need to make sure that there is a documented process that everyone can reference, and it's very clear that it's it's written down in black and white, so everyone knows what that policy is, and this is what the scheme is adopting. We're going that one little step further with all of our COVID safe management plans. We're actually just pushing out a remote meeting motion, or what we term as a circular motion, and just saying, here's the plan. We would like you to vote on adopting it. And then when someone phones up and says, why we've adopted this, it's like, well, the majority of owners have voted on this plan being accepted, and therefore we just ask that you respect the wishes of the majority within the scheme.
Okay, and once it's accepted, is it and it's taken on board, is it distributed to the owners to let them know?
Well, in the end, you would send it out as part of the motion, so they'll have that bit full transparency. What you have to be very clear is with government, the goalposts are moving every 5 minutes. So the plan, it cannot be a stagnant document. You have to be constantly looking at the document. If government comes out with a new position, how does that affect your plan? Update the plan, resend it out to the owners. So it has to be a very fluid document around government legislation as they're changing their position on things.
Okay. So another question that we've had come in, with the new proof of vaccination rules for everyone over 16 being introduced as of the 31st of January in Western Australia, would it be safe to assume that these rules would also apply to the gym, pool, spa and sauna at my complex?
No, because I guess where the phase we're moving into, and again, this is my interpretation, is that we're going into the phase of managing COVID within the community. We're not talking about lockdown. So last year, when we had an outbreak in the community, everything got locked down. So we had to close the gym, we had to close the pool, we had to close all these areas, and it was a lockdown. We're not looking to go into lockdown anymore. We're looking to go, well, how can you minimize exposure, and therefore you have to be able to live with the potential for having COVID in the community. So that's why I come back to density quotients. So the idea of limiting the number of people that use these facilities at any point in time, it reduces having mass exposure just to maybe to a couple of people. So you're minimising that exposure. And as I said, my position is I don't think you can require residents to provide proof of vaccination if they want to use the common facilities, knowing that they have an entitlement because it's common property, they have shared ownership over it, and therefore I don't think you can stop them from using the common facilities if they're not vaccinated. So that's my opinion.
Okay. So you're talking about treating areas like gyms more as like an indoor public space rather as a gym that's run by a different
like a commercial gym, completely different scenario. Yes, you do have to provide proof of vaccination, but that's a business. These, it's this grey area between a public space, a private business, and shared common space. And I think, it always comes down to the fundamental property rights, is that you're entitled to the quiet, peaceful enjoyment of your property. And in Strata, your property isn't just your apartment. It is also shared use of the common facilities.
Okay, I think that's where the confusion arises with the word gym introduced into there. And
yes.
Okay, will only vaccinated residents be allowed to attend meetings? And I know you've touched on this previously with what you're doing with Strata.
It's it's up to each individual. I believe that having an increased number of people sitting around the table increases the chance of exposure. So therefore, in trying to mitigate that, our policy in our business is that you're not getting past the front door without showing us your vaccination certificate. But every business will manage that differently. But we are trying to minimise the chances of it being spread. And I don't really want to be that strata manager that has suddenly exposed all of his clients to COVID in a strata meeting. So we're doing everything we can from making sure there's increased cleaning frequencies, wiping down tables and chairs, door handles after people have come in. We're doing everything we can because I don't want to be that strata manager. But hey, anyway, people have a different perspective on this, and you have to respect that as well.
Okay, and one of the things that we've been asked probably from every different state in Australia, and that is, how does a council of owners enforce mask wearing in common property?
I believe that there is enough out there to suggest that government's position is in enclosed areas, you need to wear a mask. And that goes for common areas. I think there's enough science, enough proof that in enclosed areas, your exposure is significantly increased. You have an obligation under the Work Health and Safety Act to ensure that you do provide a safe environment for people on people on your site and people coming into your office. There's a legislative position and just duty of care to do that. And I think enforcing the mask wearing is aligning with most state governments' positions at this point in time, in that in enclosed areas, you need to wear a mask. In open areas, so if it's an open scheme and you're just walking around the garden, I don't believe at this point in time, you could enforce the wearing of masks, but you can always ask. And you could say, for our peace of mind, we've adopted a COVID safe management plan that encourages you to wear the masks whenever you leave your apartment, between your apartment and the boundaries of the scheme. We would ask that you wear a mask for everyone's mental well-being and to promote the safety throughout our scheme.
And if residents are refusing in these common areas to wear masks, who is it the other lot owners' place to enforce that wearing of masks? Or
I don't think we can put up on our police badges and confront these people. There is a government in WA, I think the number's 131444. So the police have a dedicated line for reporting people breaching government mandated positions. I would encourage, I'd be really keen to see how they would respond to an incident in Strata. If someone's in the lobby in an enclosed area, not wearing a mask in the lift, and if you can get CCTV footage of that, I'd be really keen to see how the police would approach the matter, because that may give us the answers we're looking for. But yeah, it's not, as I said, it's up to the resident to say, if you've invited them into the scheme, that you request that they wear a mask. And if you're a resident living in the scheme, at some point you might be that person that contracts COVID. If you want the scheme there to support you, you should really adopt what their policy around how they want it to be managed on site. So if you're going to look for their support when you might be affected, accept what they want. Might not be everything you're prescribed to, but if you do the right thing, the scheme's going to be there to support you, hopefully.
Hopefully, and hopefully we're not looking at long term anyway, Scott, as well. Hopefully there'll be an end to this at some point, and we can we
might
move
still
forward.
have 12 months, but I don't think it's going away over the short term. But my hope is yes, maybe this time next year we're just masks are off, and we've all had our third booster and we're all okay, and we can just get on with our lives.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And one other question that we had, now that Omicron is in WA, what steps should we be taking in our buildings to protect our residents? I think you've basically covered this, but quick answer.
The COVID safe management plan, you need to have something written down. It can be as simple as, I've seen one pages. I'm not sure if there's quite enough to be able to really tick off on a one pager, but as long as you can say that you've looked at the scheme, you've done a site assessment, you've provided some guidance to the residents on what you would like from them, and you've provided how you'll respond to an incident. I think if you can tick off on those three things and let them know that someone has looked at the scheme and someone has considered how you can make it or minimise the risk of COVID exposure, and that's written down, and everyone can have that confidence that it's written down, then I think that's what schemes should be doing.
Okay, and now we've just we've mentioned a few times things can change really quickly. We had a quick chat before we started this to say that we really don't know where things are going in the near future or even the longer term future. So we might just we'll monitor the situation. As we said at the beginning of the session, this is Scott's opinion based on where we are now and the health advice that's been available to us. If anything comes out of the government over the next few weeks or so, we'll pop a link to that below this video to let people know that the situation has changed. And maybe, Scott, down the track, if it changes dramatically and something really does get announced, or there's a situation where it doesn't go the direction that we think it's going in, we might jump back on and sort of revisit the topic again in a few weeks or a month's time, depending on what's happening. Certainly,
I'd welcome that. That would be great.
Okay, well, thank you very much for providing that clarity to us. We'll have this out to our audience as quickly as we can. And we really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nikki.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.